The snow came early that year, falling silent and heavy over the northern mountains of Gunma like a funeral cloth. By the time Shinbei saw the valley below, its thatched roofs cowering under the weight of white, his breath came in ragged clouds, and his right arm had gone stiff beneath a blood-caked wrapping. A pike wound, deep and festered. He had fled 5 days earlier, a lone survivor of a skirmish no one would sing about, where his lord's banner had been driven into the frozen mud and left to rot. The village was smaller than expected. 20 houses at most, each hunched low against the wind like aging monks. A weather-beaten shrine stood watch at the edge of the settlement, half swallowed by a leaning cedar. A narrow road curled through the center like a pale tongue, marked with only a handful of recent footprints. He collapsed just beyond the first home, knees giving way. When the door creaked open, he barely raised his head. A small boy stood in the doorway, barefoot, dark eyes blinking at him through the cold. The child said nothing, just stared, then vanished into the house. Moments later, an older woman emerged, strong-armed and broad-faced, her hair bound under a soiled kerchief. She approached with the deliberate caution of someone who'd lived too long under threat. "He's wounded," she muttered to herself, crouching beside him. "Ronin." Shinbei tried to answer, but his teeth chattered too hard for words. She grabbed his arm without ceremony, slinging it over her shoulder. Inside, the warmth slapped him like a memory. A low fire crackled in the Airori pit. He sank beside it as the woman ladled hot broth into a bowl, the child watching from the corner of the room like a bird watching a cat. "I'm Mayo," the woman said after a long pause. "That's my son, Yotaro. You're lucky we still had broth left." He managed a nod. "Shinbei. No clan." He didn't answer. She didn't ask again. For the next few days, he remained under Miyo's roof, regaining strength in silence. His wound scabbed over, though infection still throbbed beneath the skin like a second heartbeat. He would sit by the fire and watch Mayo sow or grind millet, while Yotaro carved patterns into the soot-dark beams with a dull knife. It was a quiet life, one without war or rank, and Shinbei felt its unfamiliar weight settling over him. But the village was too quiet. Children played in the road but never laughed loudly. Doors closed quickly when strangers passed. People avoided eye contact, not out of fear of him, but something else. Something older. It was on the 4th night that an old woman pounded on Miyo's door. Her name was Otsun, toothless and rail-thin, swaddled in too many layers. Her eyes were wild. "He hasn't come back," she cried. "Kijuro. He went for firewood yesterday. Should have been home by sunset." Mayo stood still. "He went west." "He did. Said he'd try near the river bend, close to the willow." At that, Mayo tensed. "You should have stopped him." "He wouldn't listen. Said he'd be quick." Shinbei looked between them. "What is this willow?" The old woman paled. Mayo gave her a look, then turned to Shinbei. "It's an old tree on the river's edge. Massive thing. Stands alone. People say it hums during the snow, and those who go near it, sometimes, don't come back." He frowned. "Bandits." She shook her head. "Nothing's been seen. But Ojiro vanished last year. Before that, a girl. Little Sochi. All near that place. Doesn't anyone go searching?" "Once. A group of 3. They found nothing but strange footprints in the snow. None of them would speak of it after." Shinbei leaned back, uneasy. He had fought through fields of corpses. He had faced starvation, betrayal, and near death. But superstition had a way of turning even the strongest men's spines brittle. That night He stepped outside. The wind had dropped, and snow fell in slow, deliberate flakes. The whole village lay hushed. Then he heard it. A melody, barely audible, high, gentle, and wordless. Not a flute, not a bird, a hum. He turned toward the woods. The sound stopped. Shinbei didn't sleep that night. He lay on his futon, staring at the ceiling beams, watching the flicker of firelight dance like phantoms across the wood. The sound he'd heard still lingered in his ears, not imagined, not dreamed. Something had been out there. Something aware of being heard. The next morning, while Mayo and Yotaro gathered kindling from the woodpile, Shinbei took a slow walk through the village. His leg ached, but the wound was holding. The snow crunched beneath his feet, each step swallowed quickly by the falling flakes. He saw no men working fields, no hunters preparing bows, only old women sweeping paths and children drawing spirals in the snow with sticks. A string of Jizo statues marked the boundary of the main path, their heads wrapped in red cloth. Someone had recently placed fresh offerings, an orange, a stick of incense, and a tiny carved horse. At the far end of the village stood the old shrine, half buried in snow. Moss crept over the wooden torii gate, and the bell rope hung frozen in place. Shinbei climbed the steps slowly, his breath hitching in the cold. At the top, he found the priest. He was an old man with a stooped back and hands like gnarled roots, kneeling in front of a circle of lit candles. Dozens of them, set in a ring around the shrine's offering box, their flames wavering in the still air. "You're not from here," the priest said without turning. "No," Shinbei replied. "I'm just passing through. Few do these days." Shinbei nodded, then gestured to the candles. "Why so many?" The priest finally looked up. His eyes were pale with cataracts, but sharp with something deeper, like memory turned brittle with age. "To keep it away. The thing by the willow?" The old man didn't answer immediately. He placed a small stone atop a folded cloth near the candles. Then he sighed. Before the village was called Minakomi, this place had another name. Forgotten now. Long ago, a woman drowned in the river, some say by accident, others by choice. Her body was never recovered, but the willow tree. It grew taller the next year, wider, twisted, bent toward the river as though listening. Shinbei raised an eyebrow. "And you believe her spirit's inside it?" "I believe people need stories to explain what they fear." He picked up a match and lit another candle. "But fear," the priest said, "can be inherited like land, passed from one hand to the next, until no one remembers the original reason." Shinbei crouched beside the shrine, watching the flames. "Do you believe the tree is dangerous?" The priest met his eyes. "I believe something in this village is." A gust of wind snuffed 2 candles. The priest relit them without a word. Later that day, a group of villagers gathered near the edge of the woods. They stood in a silent half-circle, wrapped in coats, eyes downcast. At the center lay a bundle of cloth, mud-stained, wet, and torn. Otsune wailed as she clutched the fabric. It was Kijuro's cloak. There was no blood on it, no sign of struggle, just wetness and a faint scent, like rotting bark. No one spoke of going into the forest. No one questioned how the cloak had returned. That night, Mayo barred the door and instructed Yotaro not to peek through the shutters. She placed a bowl of salt at each corner of the room. Shinbei watched her without comment. "What do you think is happening?" he asked. She shook her head. "I've lived here all my life. Some winters are crueler than others. Sometimes we lose more than we can bury. That doesn't explain the cloak. No, she said. It doesn't. Outside, snow fell harder. The world narrowed to firelight and creaking wood. Shinbei couldn't shake the feeling that the village wasn't simply cursed. It was waiting, holding its breath. That night, he dreamed of standing beneath a great, weeping willow. Snow clung to its limbs like silk. A woman stood at its base, back turned, humming that same high tune. Her hair was long, dark, wet. When she turned around, she had no face. He woke with a gasp, heart hammering, the room dark and silent, except for the sound of Yotaro whispering in his sleep. She's watching the door. Shinbei rose early. The snow had not let up, but the village was beginning to stir. He dressed, wrapped his cloak tightly, and slipped out before Mayo or Yotaro could stop him. The hum was still in his ears. He made his way west, toward the river. No one saw him leave, or if they did, no one called out. The willow, they said, lay a mile beyond the edge of the woods, a path marked only by memory and cautious feet. He followed the thin trail of broken twigs and ice-packed footprints. Kijuro's trail, maybe. The forest closed in quickly. Pines lined the slopes, heavy with snow, their limbs drooping low like grieving monks. As he walked, the silence grew strange, too complete, as if even the birds had chosen to keep their distance. After some time, he found the clearing. The willow stood at the far end, its pale grey bark twisting in upon itself like writhing arms. Its long, thin branches bent low, dragging along the snow-covered ground like strands of hair. It looked old, older than the war, older than the village. Shinbei stepped closer, his boots crunching on brittle ice. There were objects at the base of the tree. Offerings. A cracked sake bowl, rusted prayer bells, a child's sandal. His breath misted the air, then froze mid-motion. There were footprints, too many to count, circling the tree, crossing each other. Bare feet. Small. Some adult. Some tiny. He crouched to examine them, and noticed something stranger. All the prints went toward the tree. None led away. A breeze lifted the branches and revealed something nailed into the trunk, shreds of old rice paper, charred black around the edges. Fuda charms, perhaps. Protection wards. Torn and weathered, forgotten by time. A soft creak above him. Shinbei looked up. Nothing. But the humming returned. It was faint, just a few high notes carried by the wind. Female. Wordless. As though someone were rocking a baby just out of sight. He drew his short blade instinctively, not out of fear, but habit. The hum stopped immediately. Then came a different sound, a shuffle behind him. He turned fast, blade raised. It was Yotaro. The boy stood at the tree line, panting, cheeks flushed red from cold and exertion. "What are you doing here?" Shinbei barked, sheathing his blade. "I followed you. You shouldn't be alone here." Shinbei cursed under his breath. "You shouldn't be here either. Your mother." "She knows," Yotaro said, stepping closer. "She tried to stop me. But I had to see. I've heard her too." Shinbei froze. "Who?" "The lady under the willow." The boy pointed. "I saw her once. When my father died." Shinbei's stomach dropped. "Your father?" Yotaro nodded. "He went missing the same way. They said he slipped into the river. But I heard her, the night after, humming from the woods. And then he was gone." Shinbei took the boy's hand and turned them both around. "We're leaving." "No one ever leaves," the boy whispered. "You've felt it, haven't you? The village. How quiet it is. How cold, even by fire. Everyone's scared. But no one does anything." Back in Minnekommy, the priest was waiting for them, as though he knew they would return. He sat by the shrine, the candles nearly burned out. Snow blanketed his shoulders. He didn't shiver. "She grows stronger in winter," he said, not looking up. "The cold is her ally." Shinbei crouched beside him. "Is she real?" The old man was silent a long time. "She's a shadow," he said finally, "a shape made from our grief. Every family in Minnekommy has lost someone to the willow, but there's something they never admit." Shinbei waited. "They gave her permission. Long ago. During the famine. The first winter after the warlords passed us by. We were starving. They began to offer sacrifices. First the sick, then the useless, then the inconvenient." His voice cracked. "Now she comes whether we ask or not. It's no longer a choice." Yotaro stared, horrified. "Why doesn't anyone stop it?" The priest looked at him, and then at Shinbei. "Because the tree doesn't kill. It only listens. It hears what people want, and takes who they fear losing least." That night, Shinbei couldn't sleep. He sat by the hearth with the embers dying low, Yotaro curled under his blanket across the room. Mayo sat upright, staring at the door as though waiting for it to open. "You found the tree?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Shinbei replied. "And the priest told you the story?" "He did." She nodded, her eyes not leaving the door. "Then you understand." Shinbei said nothing. His thoughts were thick, churning. It wasn't a ghost that stalked the village. It was belief. A ritual passed down in silence. Each winter, the fear returned, and someone vanished. And the village, instead of fighting it, folded into its grief like a rotting tooth left to ache. "I saw the footprints," he said. "They all walked willingly." Mayo closed her eyes. "You knew." Her jaw clenched. "Not at first. But after my husband died, I started to see it. How people looked away when names were spoken. How they pretended not to hear the humming. Who chooses?" She didn't answer. Then, "It's not always one person. It's understood. When food runs low. When illness spreads. When someone is too weak or troublesome. And this winter?" She looked at Yotaro. A long pause. "I tried to hide him. I fed him well. Kept him close. But the neighbors watched. They'd seen me take your wounded body in. They thought that was foolish. Wasteful." Shinbei felt the air leave his lungs. "They were going to take him." Mayo nodded. "I heard them. The whispers. That he was too soft. That he cried at night. That the village needed peace. So you sent him after me." Her gaze finally met his. "You were the only one who could do anything. Who hadn't been here long enough to surrender." Shinbei stood slowly, heart pounding. "They sent the children before, didn't they?" She looked down at her hands. "Yes." He turned and stepped outside into the snow. The village slept. Doors barred. Chimneys still. No footsteps but his own. But he felt them behind shutters, behind rice-paper walls. Listening. Waiting. He went to the shrine. The priest was there again. He hadn't moved. "She's choosing again," Shinbei said. The priest nodded. The snow's heaviest tonight. It's always then. Shinbei stared at the candles, now guttered into puddles of wax. There's nothing supernatural, is there? The priest didn't answer. It's just people, killing quietly, and blaming the wind. Isn't that the most frightening truth? The priest whispered. That we don't need monsters. We make our own. Shinbei returned to Mio's home just before dawn. Yotaro was awake, huddled near the wall. They knocked, he whispered. Mio stood over him, kitchen knife in hand. I won't let them take him, she said. They won't, Shinbei replied. But he knew what needed to be done. He wrapped himself in his cloak and stepped outside again. Down the lane, 3 men stood in the snow. They weren't armed, but their posture said enough. They didn't expect resistance. You're not from here, one of them said. No. Then you know how these things go. You saw the tree. I did. The men looked at one another, relieved. That meant he understood. That meant he would step aside. Shinbei exhaled and drew his blade. The men froze. I'm done running from cowards, Shinbei said. The first man stepped back. You'd draw steel for a child? Yes, Shinbei said, because you won't. That was all it took. They didn't fight. They left without a word, disappearing into doorways like smoke. And when dawn finally rose, it lit a silent village. No one spoke. But they wouldn't come again. Not this year. Not while Shinbei remained. The snow lightened in the coming days. Mio burned the old charms she'd hidden. The priest died in his sleep 2 nights later, candles still warm at his side. Spring came early. The willow remained, but no one visited it again. Shinbei stayed through the thaw. He repaired roofs, taught Yotaro how to sharpen a blade, how to walk silently in the woods. The villagers avoided him now. They kept their distance. But no more children vanished. No more cloaks returned in the snow. Some evils are born of superstition, others of starvation. But the worst, Shinbei had learned, were the ones people agreed upon silently, together. In the end, the curse was not a ghost. It was convenience. And no monster hungered like a village afraid to question its own silence.